Hello there, very good evening and welcome to Primetime News here on News First, where the people come first. You're joining me, Naveksha Gunasekara. And we start off by taking a look at your headlines tonight.
Sri Lanka ranks third among countries in terms of real food inflation. Our children in rural Sri Lanka facing a nutrition crisis.
හැම වර්ධන සටහනකම වගේ අපිට පේන දෙයක් තමයි මේ දරුවන් ඉන්නේ වර්ධන සටහනේ රතු පාට සීමාව ඇතුළේ.
මේ තියෙන ආර්ථිකෙත් එක්ක බිත්තර මස් මාළු කියන දේ දකින්නවත් විදියක් නැහැ.
Government's paddy purchasing mechanism crippled. Farmers' woes deepen. Donate now. Help Sri Lanka. An open request from the United Nations.
It is time for Friends of Sri Lanka to step up now.
A word of advice from the Mahasangha to the Prime Minister.
දැන් 60න් යන්න කිව්වනේ ඔක්කොම විශ්‍රාම. ඒ හින්දා මං හිතන හැටියට ඊළඟ එනකොට 60ට පල්ලෙහා කට්ටියට තමයි දෙන්න ඕනේ.
Will not abandon the people's struggle for ministerial positions. A statement from the opposition leader. Queen Elizabeth II to be laid to rest in first state funeral in over 70 years.
The top story tonight, a World Bank report has confirmed what every Sri Lankan knows, that Sri Lanka has one of the highest inflation rates in the world. A report on food security by the World Bank has found that Sri Lanka is in the third place according to the real food inflation figures between September 2021 and August 2022, and at the fourth place in terms of nominal food inflation.
Sri Lanka ranks fourth in the world in terms of nominal food inflation at 91% on a year-on-year basis. According to the World Bank report, Zimbabwe, Lebanon and Venezuela are ranked first, second and third among the countries with high nominal inflation. The report indicates that over 205 million people worldwide will face a food crisis or an acute food crisis due to this situation. The report also warns of the threat of famine for the Somali Gulf region between October and December this year. Projecting a decrease in production of rice in 2022, the Agricultural Market Information System assessed that reduced harvest prospects for India and a few other countries including Bangladesh and Sri Lanka outweighed slight upward revisions for Brazil and a few West African countries, although average international rice prices changed little month to month, with mixed movements in the major exporters.
Representatives from the coalition of physicians' unions on medical and civil rights inspected the conditions in terms of nutrition of children in Koswagawa, Suryawava in Hambantota today.
දරුවගේ වර්ධන සටහනයක් පේනවා මේ රතු පාට සීමාවට ආසන්න වෙමින් තමයි ගමන් කරන්නේ කියන්නේ.
කෑම වේලා ඉතින් වෙනදා වගේ දී ගන්න අමාරුයි. ඉතින් මාළු ඩිංගක් මස් ඩිංගක් එහෙම බිත්තරයක් දෙන්න ඉතින් අමාරුයි වෙනදා වගේ.
බබාලා දෙන්නගේ මේ tie රතු සීමාවට ආසන්න දෙන්නගින් 100%ක් විතර වෙලා තියෙනවා ළමයි දෙන්නේ ළමයි දෙන්නකොට මන්ද පෝෂණ තත්ත්වයේ තමයි මේ සටහන් වලට අනුව තියෙන්නේ.
The following views were expressed after the inspection.
මේ හැම වර්ධන සටහනකම වගේ අපිට පේන දෙයක් තමයි.
Looking at the nutritional charts, we can see that every child is in the danger zone. We meet children who are in risky conditions. We observed conditions of children moving from normal to levels of serious malnutrition within 6 months. The morning meeting is not conducted in some schools. That is because many of the children who take part in the meeting faint. As a result, schools have stopped conducting the meeting.
උදෑසන රැස්වීම දැන් තියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ උදෑසන රැස්වීමට සහභාගී වෙන දරුවෝ අතරින් වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් රැස්වීම වෙලාවේදී කලන්තේ හැදිලා වැටෙන නිසා සමහර පාසල්වල උදෑසන රැස්වීම නතර කරලා තියෙනවා.
Several mothers expressed these views thereafter.
මම ගර්භණී කාන්තාව මේ වෙනකොට මම යකඩ
I'm pregnant. I'm currently suffering from iron deficiency. They tell us to eat at least fish or eggs. Given the economic condition in the country, we can't afford that. The income we earn from hired work is not sufficient to purchase fish. For households in this division with 3 to 4 children who are underweight, a single egg won't suffice. When we make a tomato curry, the children ask us for dried fish or sprats. We are helpless when they make such pleas.
දැදුවම පොඩි අය ගිහිල්ලා අහනවා කරෝල කෑල්ල
මල්ලක් නෑ, හාල් මැස්සෙක් නෑ. මේවා කන්න පුළුවන්ද කියලා. ඉතින් ඒ වෙලාවට ඇත්තටම ගොඩාක් අසරණයි ගෙදර.
මේ දරුවෝ දැන් පෝෂණ සායන වලට දාලා තියෙනවා. ડોක්ටර්ලා කියන්නේ සමබල ආහාර වේලක් ලබා දෙන්න කියලා 3 වේලෙම දෙන්න කියලා කියනවා. නමුත් අපිට මේ තියෙන තත්ත්වයට එක්ක සමබල ආහාර වේලයක් දෙන්න බෑ ඇත්තටම.
Convening a media briefing in Colombo, the National Organization of Scholars expressed the following views regarding the state of children's nutrition in Sri Lanka. The public is facing issues when it comes to purchasing food. Grain production has dropped by 32.3%. Tea production has reduced by 19.7%. Paddy production has dropped by 15.6%. Fisheries harvests have dropped 15.3%, animal produce by 13.6% and vegetable production by 13.2%. This will directly affect the nutritional conditions of children. Owing to the current economic condition, people are compelled to have one meal a day.
Resident Coordinator of the United Nations, Hannah Singer Hamdi, says that the United Nations has mobilized nearly $50 million in response to Sri Lanka's crisis. In a tweet, she said the UN has reached 1 million people with humanitarian assistance in the areas of food security, agriculture, nutrition, water protection, education and health.
I have had the honor to serve Sri Lanka as the United Nations Resident Coordinator for 4 years. I have witnessed this country's progress in health, education and poverty alleviation. Between 2014 to 2020, Sri Lanka was declared free of polio, measles, rubella, and the mother-to-child transmission of HIV. And access to education became nearly universal. But today, Sri Lanka is hurting, hit by the worst economic crisis since its independence. And these gains are threatened. The effects of the crisis are far-reaching, impacting food security, health, and education. It is time for friends of Sri Lanka to step up now. We need your help to provide food security and medicines for Sri Lanka's most vulnerable population and an education opportunity for every child. Every dollar you donate will help save a life, feed a family, educate a child. It is time to donate now. It is time to join hands in rebuilding Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka is currently facing its worst economic crisis since independence in 1948. What is the government's way forward in a time when the United Nations is seeking international relief to provide food, education and medicine to underprivileged communities?
Farmers had to undertake massive expenses to cultivate this yellow season, despite the government revising its stance on chemical fertilizer. However, farmers are unable to even recover the cost of cultivation by selling their paddy at current market prices. The government announced its guaranteed price for paddy as farmers commenced reaping their harvest for the yellow season. Nadu was priced at 120 rupees, Samba at 125 rupees and Kiri Samba was priced at 130 rupees. A cabinet paper was passed to obtain 2 billion rupees in financing facilities for this procedure. However, chairman of the Paddy Marketing Board, Neil Dialvis, says they were only able to purchase 7,072 metric tons of paddy so far this yellow season at a cost of 871 million rupees. The chairman says farmers are yet to receive 151 million rupees in payment. Farmers have no choice but to sell their paddy to private merchants as the government has failed to purchase their paddy in its entirety.
We had to purchase a sack of fertilizer for 40,000 rupees this season. Other types of fertilizer cost us around 15 to 20,000 rupees. The price for paddy is unfair and unjust. The market price of paddy is 80 to 90 rupees. The government said they'll purchase our paddy at 120 rupees. We're still waiting for that day to become a reality. They purchase paddy at 100 rupees before it's dried and at 110 rupees once it's dried. We have nothing left for ourselves once we spent about 20,000 rupees to harvest each acre and pay remuneration. Our income this season is half half of what it was last season. It cost us 13,800 just to fuel our machines. They must at least pay us 200 rupees for our paddy. Prices of everything has doubled. We have to pay around 2,500 rupees a day per labourer, and we have to provide them food as well. We are unable to farm because we just can't make a living out of it anymore. Look what they did. They stopped purchasing paddy so that paddy merchants can purchase paddy at inferior prices. They are purchasing paddy at 90 rupees. They are only paying 80 rupees in Nikavarattiya. The cost of a kilogram of paddy is over 150 rupees. Who is going to bear the burden of this loss when they pay only 100 rupees a kilo? They say they don't have money and that banks haven't issued them loans. The government has incentivized the paddy mafia to thrive.
However, rice mill owners claim they are purchasing paddy at the government's guaranteed price.
They need at least 140 rupees to thrive. We are willing to pay that price. The only reason we can't do that is that the government has issued a gazette implementing a ceiling price of 220 rupees per kilo of rice. We challenge the government. We will dissolve the United Rice Mill Owners Association if anyone can prove we purchased paddy below 100 rupees in Polonnaruwa or anywhere else in Sri Lanka for paddy that is less than 14% moisture.
The Minister of Agriculture had this to say.
I inquired from someone who purchases paddy in Hambantota. He said they purchase paddy at 125 and 130 as well, but it's ceiling at 90 to 95 rupees in other areas. We received information that the director board of the two banks is holding a meeting on the 22nd. We are hoping for a positive response from them so that farmers across Sri Lanka can receive a fair price for their paddy.
Isn't the government able to formulate a secure way forward that protects both farmers and the consumers at a time Sri Lanka is not only facing a severe economic crisis but also on the brink of a severe food insecurity?
Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, who visited the Mihintale Rajamaha Vihara earlier today, explained the country's current state of affairs to Chief Incumbent Venerable Valavahan Gunawave Dhammaratna Thera.
As of now, we owe nearly 24 trillion. When we take a family, they owe about 5.8 million. The people who rule this country should be held responsible, including all of you. You raised your hands to everything and signed everything, but where are the income and expense reports of these? So, a national policy should be implemented. Everyone dislikes the 225. And that is because they have acted in a way which has brought about distaste for politicians among the people. That has led the people to voice their dissent over it and reject politicians. 37 to 38 state ministerial positions were also given. More will be given in the future. What will happen if these people work voluntarily, saying our country has suffered such a calamity? The people elected us. Only one vehicle will suffice. We will bring food from home. Are they unable to set such an example? In countries like China, there are millions of people and they have less than 20 ministers, but we have 225. What for? The retirement age is amended to 60 years, but most policymakers in parliament need a walking stick. In my opinion, those below the age of 60 must be in charge of running the country. The president heaped praise on the cricket team's unity, but the 225 in parliament cannot unite. They will never unite. That is why the people continue to reject them.
The state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II took place at Westminster Abbey this afternoon. The committal service is currently underway at St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. This marks the end of 10 days of events across the UK since the Queen's death. The UK's longest-serving monarch died at Balmoral, aged 96, on the 8th of September after reigning for 70 years.
The Prince of Wales and the Duke of Sussex walked side by side behind their father, King Charles III. The King walked alongside his siblings, the Queen's 4 children. The procession to the Abbey saw the state gun carriage carry the coffin, drawn by 142 sailors, while the sound of pipes and drum rang out. This was at 3:04 Sri Lankan time. All of a sudden, the speakers come alive in the mall with the sounds of the funeral choir. People get to their feet and the crowds fall quiet. A 2,000-strong congregation raised as the procession of the coffin enters the 13th century church. The Queen was carried to Westminster Abbey. It is where she was married in 1947 and crowned in 1953, and where she attended royal weddings and funerals. The Dean of Westminster, who led the service, expressed the gratitude for the Queen's quote-unquote lifelong sense of duty.
To a place of prayer, to a church where remembrance and hope are sacred duties.
About 500 leaders and dignitaries from the UK and around the world were at Westminster Abbey watching the service. Sri Lanka's President Ranil Wickremesinghe paid his last respects to the Queen yesterday. Many members of foreign royal families were seen sitting opposite the British royal family in the church. However, leaders from Russia, Belarus, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Syria and Venezuela were not invited for the funeral. The wreath on top of the Queen's coffin, at the King's request, contains foliage of rosemary, English oak and myrtle, which had been cut from a plant grown from myrtle that was in the Queen's wedding bouquet. There are also flowers in shades of gold, pink and deep burgundy, with touches of white, cut from the gardens of royal residences. Arrangements for this state funeral are on a scale not seen in Britain for 70 years, since the funeral procession of King George VI in 1952. The Queen will be buried in Windsor Castle's St. George's Chapel alongside her husband Prince Philip and royal predecessors.
Meanwhile, Prince William has tweeted a video of a Sri Lankan Airlines aircraft displaying a portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II celebrating the life and reign. The Sri Lankan Airlines flight had displayed the special livery in remembrance of the late Queen Elizabeth II.
We'll be back after a short commercial break. Stay with us.
News First, main sponsor.
Angka eke araksita iti gini petti. Surya gini petti.
නිවෙස පුරා ගලන මේ සතුට සුරක්ෂිත කරන්නේ Islam Insight. Islam ජීවයයි ජලයයි ජීවිතේ.
Welcome back to the news. A Ukrainian journalist has released horrific details about the 7 Sri Lankans who were allegedly captured and tortured by Russian soldiers in the Kharkiv region near the Russian border, where there has been intense fighting for months. The 7 are currently safe in a Ukrainian rehabilitation center.
Sergei Bolvinov, the chief of the investigative department of the Kharkiv region police, had told Maria Romanenko, a Ukrainian journalist reporting from the UK, that the 6 men and 1 woman were beaten. 2 had their nails torn off, and all were forced to work cleaning up a house occupied by Russian soldiers. The Russian soldiers had also tried to extort money from the Sri Lankans. The Kharkiv police had opened an investigation for violation of the laws and customs of war. The 7, aged 20 to 40, some of them students, and the others had come for work, arrived in Ukraine around 3 weeks before the all-out invasion last March and rented a house in Kupiansk, a town that was captured by Russian forces and occupied until it was retaken by the Ukrainian army a few days ago. She tweeted that they were hiding in their house for some time until they decided to try and flee into Kharkiv. However, they were stopped at the first Russian checkpoint that they tried to cross. She added, the Russians blindfolded them and took them to the nearby town of Vovchansk, which was also occupied by Russian forces until a few days ago. The police chief said, quote, after the area was liberated by Ukraine, the 7 Sri Lankans tried to walk into Kharkiv again. When they found a hotel on their way, the security guard there took them in, looked after them and called the police. They are now safe and the police are investigating their case, end quote. The names of the 7 have not yet been made available by authorities. Newsfirst reached out to the Russians and Ukrainian authorities about the student story, but no details have been received up to now. Sri Lanka's foreign ministry said it is inquiring into the matter. Newsfirst has not been able to independently corroborate the Ukrainian journalist's story.
A party meeting of the Samajana Jhana Palavega was held in Kolonava last evening, headed by the opposition leader Sajith Premadasa.
The party meeting was organized by parliamentarian S.M. Marika, who is also the chief organizer for Kolonava as well as media spokesperson for the SJB. SLPP Councillor of the Kolonava Urban Council Suresh Kumara and Rohit Rukman from the Vellampitiya division pledged their support to the SJB during the meeting. We are UNPers. The vision of the UNP is with us. The Samajana Jhana Palavega is the real UNP. Ranil Wickremesinghe has pawned the UNP to the murderous Rajapaksas. He believes he can act according to his own whims and fancies now that he is president. We dare you to come for an election. This government loots from gas and fuel while the people's lives are in dire straits. The people cannot go on like this any longer. We cannot allow thieves to run this country any longer. The Samajana Jhana Palavega will defeat this government during next year's election. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa also addressed the gathering. Kolonava has a hero. Marikka's work in this electorate will be backed by a Samajana Jhana Palavega government. Under the next Samajana Jhana Palavega government, SM Marikka will serve both Kolonava and the country as a whole as nothing less than a cabinet minister. The country was doing well in 2019. Do you remember that quote by a famous actor? This was a good country. What happened to us? I think that quote is more suitable for 2022. Malnutrition has increased. The government is unable to provide 3 posha to mothers and children. There is a severe medicine shortage and they want us to join their government and take on ministerial portfolios. No one who betrayed the Aragale of the people will become a minister in an SJB government.
Lawyers of the struggle organization convened a media briefing in Colombo today.
Even if the IMF releases the funds, can we as citizens expect these problems to be solved in the future? As citizens, we will not forget that Sri Lanka went to the IMF for the 17th time. In all these instances, we gave promises to the IMF, obtained the funds, went back to our engaging in corrupt activities.
සති 3-4කින් හම්බෙන ණය ටික අරගෙන ආයේ පරණ සුපුරුදු හොරකමේ වංචාවේ යෙදුණා. ජූලි 9 ඇයි පාරට බැස්සේ ඇයි අරග
Do you remember why people took to the streets on the 9th of July? Nothing has changed in this country since then. The rulers of this country have sacrificed the lives of citizens like you and I. Today, one by one, ministers and state ministers are being sworn in. Do they have money to run the ministries? They are appointed nevertheless. Even though you receive petrol and gas, is this the right thing to do? No. The country's issues still prevail. The money stolen by the Rajapaksa has not been recovered. Nothing has changed. The system must be changed. For that, citizens must act intelligently. Meanwhile, convening a media briefing in Colombo, the People's Council organization revealed details of a decision made by temples to disconnect electricity supply from 6 p.m. daily in lieu of the hike in electricity tariffs.
Low-income earners are being charged 300%. Places of religious worship are being charged 555%. How is this fair? How can we face this selfishness of the Ceylon Electricity Board? Not just Theros, all religious leaders and the general public have come to an understanding. We are unable to pay. Therefore, we will not pay.
තීරණයකට එළඹෙනවා ගෙවන්න විදියක් නැහැ මෙවන් බරපතල ගෙවීමක් ගෙවන්න විදියක් නැහැ ගෙවන්න බෑ ඒ නිසා ගෙවන්නේ නැහැ දැන් අපි
We have decided to cut off electricity at temples after 6 p.m. and leave them in the dark.
සියලු විදුලි විසන්ධි කොට විහාරස්ථාන අඳුරේ තබන්න.
මොකද මහත්තයා මේ නෑ මේ ගෙදර සිංක් එකේ අයි මහත්තයා ස්ලෝන් නෙමෙයිද දැම්මේ හදිස්සියට බාලා පයිප්පයක් දැම්මේ නැද්ද මුදලාලි ඊයේ පෙරේදා කඩේ රිපෙයාර් කරන්න ගෙනාපු ගම් චුට්ටක් මේ වගේ ප්‍රශ්න වලට හොඳම විසඳුම ස්ලෝන් ගම් චුට්ටක් හැබැයි ඉක්මනින් දාගන්න ස්ලෝන් පයිප්පයක්
ස්ලෝන් ගම් චුට්ටා හැම ගෙදරකම සිටිය යුතු ජලනල කාර්මිකයා දැන් ළඟම ග්‍රොසරියෙන් මිලදී ගන්න.
The government's desperate attempts to infuse foreign exchange into the country will take another step forward this Friday when Sri Lanka is scheduled to lay out the full extent of its economic troubles, together with the plans for debt restructuring and a multi-billion-dollar bailout from the International Monetary Fund at a presentation to its international creditors. According to a statement published by the Ministry of Finance via legal firm Clifford Chance, the online call on September 23rd would be open to all its external creditors and be an interactive session in which participants can ask questions. The statement added that Sri Lankan authorities intend to update their external creditors on the most recent macroeconomic developments, the main objectives of the reform package agreed on with the IMF, and the next steps of the debt restructuring process. Sri Lanka managed to reach a preliminary deal with the IMF, and if formalized, it would provide the country with $2.9 billion in loans over a 4-year period.
This is very likely part of the ongoing engagement that Sri Lanka is having with our creditors. So in order to deal with our debt problem, given that our debt has been called unsustainable, we do need to start working on the debt restructuring side. So right now we have suspended payments on our debt in April, but we'll have to continue having negotiations with our creditors, trying to figure out what kind of new deal that we can work out with them so that we can continue paying our debt in the future, but at a way that in new terms that work with us. So this presentation, from what the reports are saying, sounds like where the Sri Lankan government, now armed with the numbers essentially that the IMF staff level agreement has provided, is going to present some of the debt related numbers, the technical details behind our debt situation to our creditors so that we can have a foundation upon which to hold further discussions and further negotiations. The main thing stopping board level approval from the IMF is the fact that our debt is still considered unsustainable. For the IMF to legally lend or provide support, provide financial support to a country, they can't do that to a country that is just has unsustainable debt. It has at the very least to make progressive steps or reasonable steps towards sustainability of its debt. So for Sri Lanka, the first step there is very likely going to be getting into some sort of agreement with our bilateral creditors, mostly especially our, that is other countries. So India, China, Japan, the other Western countries that also have a certain amount of it. I think France has a certain amount of, among them. So we need to get into some sort of agreement there. Not a full final agreement, but what's likely is that we get some initial step where we say, look, we don't have money. We are not going to, let's agree that we will not be able to pay this debt over the next year or two at least. And from that point onwards, let's discuss about what the future will hold. I think the IMF money shouldn't be thought of as something directly helping the situation on the ground, but something that will help the country's overall economic stability. And from that point onwards, what can the Sri Lankan government do to help people on the ground?
Meanwhile, reports from foreign media states that India has loaned Sri Lanka $968 million during the first 4 months of 2022. The report indicates that India has now surpassed China to become Sri Lanka's biggest bilateral creditor. China, Sri Lanka's biggest creditor between the years 2017 and 2021, has lent Sri Lanka $947 million. Food insecurity, medicine and education are severe problems faced by the average Sri Lankan citizens. But what about politicians? Are they plagued by similar problems? Their only issue concerns political power. Now, this was the situation that arose at the Ampalangoda Municipal Council when the Deputy Chairman Kamal Vallage was appointed as a new chairman by a vote after the previous chairman resigned.
This was the situation a Samajana Jhana Municipal Council member had to experience after she decided to support a nominee from the opposition.
You lot have only passed the 8th grade. How dare you hoot at me? I have been a lawyer for 23 years. I am an unofficial magistrate. I have a law degree. The new chairman's brother hooted at me. His Facebook account shows posts of humiliation after the May 9th incident, and he has the audacity to hoot at me. Is this the caliber of people in Sri Lankan politics?
Another phase of the island-wide mobile protests demanding the repealing of the Prevention of Terrorism Act was held in Anuradhapura today. I would like to warn this government, when people who eat 2 meals a day are forced to eat 1, people who took to the streets with flags will protest with their children next. The situation will worsen then. By calling activists terrorists, you might turn everyone into a terrorist in the future. Do not do that. The people in this country do not have food to eat, they do not have fuel, gas, fertilizer or medicine. Given such a situation, he has spent hundreds of thousands of rupees to see the Queen. Wasantha Mudalige, who hails from an indigenous community, is in prison. You cannot rule the country through suppression. Before we die, we must save this country from the likes of you. This country was destroyed by rulers who promised eras of prosperity and good governance.
The People's Tribunal on the murder of journalists presented its verdict today, declaring that the government of Sri Lanka, Mexico and Syria are guilty of all charges of human rights violations brought against them.
The People's Tribunal on the murder of journalists is an internationally recognized body which operates independently from state authorities on the basis of the framework defined in the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Peoples. It was set up by Reporters Without Borders, Free Press Unlimited and the Committee to Protect Journalists. The tribunal stated that the governments of Sri Lanka, Mexico and Syria have also violated a number of other conventions, treaties and other international, regional and national legal instruments which they themselves themselves have committed to uphold. The tribunal indicted the governments of Sri Lanka, Syria and Mexico over their failure to service justice in the cases of the deaths of journalists Lasantha Wickramatunge, Miguel Angel Lopez Velasco and Nabil Al-Shabaji. Pointing out that an alarming number of journalists have been murdered in relation to their work, the tribunal said that since 1992, at least 1,400 journalists have been killed for doing their job. The People's Tribunal says that in the case of the murder of journalist Lasantha Wickramatunge, the government, through their acts and omissions, committed violations of the right to life, the right to expression of freedom, the right to freedom of expression, and the right to freedom from discrimination based on political opinion.
Few days ago, Newsfirst shed light on the state of Sri Lanka's railway network. Today, our predictions sadly came true when yet another train derailed. A train bound for Hikkaduwa derailed near Fort today, restricting train travel along the coastal line to a single track. However, train travel along the coastal line has been restored. Day 15 of the 4th edition of the DeviSavio program, seeking to support the most impoverished communities in Sri Lanka, continued centering the Kandy and Nuwara districts today. The program is supported by LOLC Holdings.
Today's inaugural program got underway at the Navalapitiya Divisional Secretariat in the Kandy district. Essential relief packages were doled out to families in critical need of relief in areas of the Kandy and Nuwara districts today. The program aims to provide nutritious meals to low-income earning families in Sri Lanka.
And that's a wrap of primetime news here on News First, where the people come first. For all these stories and much more, you can visit our website www.newsfirst.lk. Thank you for joining. Good night.